So today I'll be continuing with my college football game by game prediction and roster discussion videos. Today I'll be doing the Kansas State Wildcats. So Kansas State only had the 37th ranked recruiting class in the country in 2025. The recruiting class only had two four-star players, and it didn't have any five-star players. So starting on the offensive side of the roster, they averaged at 28.5 points per game last year, which is solid, but not great. And I think there's a good chance that they'll be able to improve from that this season. So at quarterback, Avery Johnson had a good year. He threw for 2,712 yards and 25 touchdowns. He did throw 10 interceptions, though, which wasn't great. And he completed 58.3% of his passes, which is solid but not great. And he had a 7.3 yards per throw average, which is solid but not great. But he ran for 605 yards and seven touchdowns on 113 carries, averaging 5.4 yards per carry. And for Kansas State to have a good team again, Avery Johnson doesn't have to be any different than he was last year. But for Kansas State to win the Big 12 this year, I think Avery Johnson is going to have to improve some as a passer because he was not great as a passer last year. He was just good. And at wide receiver, they returned their best one, Jace Brown, who is good. He had last year 47 catches for 823 and five touchdowns, averaging a really impressive 17.5 a catch. But besides Jace Brown, they aren't great at wide receiver. But at running back, they averaged over 200 rushing yards per game last year, and I expect them to do the same this year, even though they lose DJ Giddens, who averaged over 100 yards per game rushing last season himself. They've got Dylan Edwards, who will be the starting running back, a four-star running back that had 546 on only 74 carries last season. He averaged a very impressive 7.4 a carry, and he had five touchdown runs. And he's a better catcher than most running backs are. He had a touchdown catch in the bowl game that he started in. I think he's going to have a huge year this year. And they've also got Joe Jackson, who only got 39 carries last year, but he did have 227 and a touchdown, averaging 5.8 a carry. He impressed me in the bowl game against Rutgers too. He only got seven carries, but he had a 50 yards rushing in it. And in the bowl game, he also caught three passes for 37 yards and a touchdown. That he'll be running back number two, and I think he'll be good for them too. And on the offensive line, they were one of the best in the country last year. They only allowed 13 sacks all year and were one of the best in the country at run blocking. And Kansas State does lose three starting offensive linemen from last season, but last year they had lost three starting offensive linemen from the year before when they also had one of the best offensive lines in the country, and the offensive line turned out to be even better than the year before. But they do return at center Sam Peck, who's one of the best centers in the country, and they returned right guard Taylor Petier, who only allowed 13 quarterback pressures and didn't allow a sack all season. And the other three starters are likely to be transfers. But Kansas State's head coach Chris Kleiman is one of the best in the country at coaching offensive lines. I would expect them to still be very good here. And on the defensive side, they gave up on average 22.1 points per game last year, which is pretty good, but not great. And I expect it to be similar this year. So on the defensive line, they return two of three starters, but the starter they lose was their best defensive lineman last year. They do have good defensive linemen, but they don't have any superstar players. And at linebacker, they returned their best one and leading tackler from last season, Austin Romaine, who had last year 96 tackles and two sacks and 22 total quarterback pressures. And he also had three forced fumbles and two pass breakups. And at linebacker, they returned two out of three starters from last season. And at cornerback, they bring in a transfer corner from South Alabama, Amarian Fortenberry is his name. He played in 13 games last year and made eight starts and had 45 tackles and seven pass breakups and two interceptions and a forced fumble. But they're going to need somebody else to step up at corner. And then at safety, they should be very good. They return VJ Payne, who was really good. He had last year 64 tackles and four pass breakups and two interceptions and two forced up fumbles. And they bring in a transfer safety from Arizona, Gunnar Maldonado, or whatever his name is. He only played in four games last year because of an injury, but in 2023, when Arizona had the good year, he had 81 tackles and two interceptions and two forced fumbles and a pass breakup. And on special teams, Dylan Edwards was one of the best return specialists in the country last year. He even had a punt return for a touchdown. So now for the game by game predictions, starting with Iowa State. So Iowa State's quarterback, Rocco Beck, was a better passer last year than Avery Johnson was. And Iowa State, I think, is going to have a good run game too, but probably not quite as good as Kansas State. But Iowa State returns but nearly all of their front seven. So I think they may be able to slow down Kansas State's run game some. And I think Kansas State will slow down Iowa State's run game some too. But Iowa State has five offensive linemen coming back with starting experience, and I think that might make the difference. I'm almost sure this will be a one-score game that goes down to the end, but I'm going to go with Iowa State to get this win. So now North Dakota State. This probably won't be like a 50 to nothing type of blowout win for Kansas State, but I do know that North Dakota State is one of the best FCS teams, even though I don't really keep up with FCS football. But this will be a blowout win for Kansas State, and they're at second string. Will be playing by at least the beginning of the fourth quarter, probably sooner than that. And then Army, the same thing. It won't be like a 50 to nothing type of blowout win for Kansas State, but it'll be a blowout win. And Kansas State's second string will be playing by the beginning of the fourth quarter. And now on the road at Arizona, Kansas State, I think, will outcoach Arizona by a lot in this game. And Arizona, I don't think is going to be able to score much on Kansas State's defense. And I think Kansas State will run for a bunch of yards in this game, and I think they'll blow out Arizona. And now Central Florida. I think in this one, Kansas State will outcoach at Central Florida by a lot. And I don't think that Central Florida is going to be able to stop Kansas State's run game. And I think Kansas State's defense will shut them down pretty much. And I think this will be another blowout win for Kansas State. And now on the road at Baylor. So, having looked carefully now at Baylor's roster, they're a serious contender, I think, to win the Big 12 this year if they can get it all together. They've got a quarterback that was a better passer last year than Avery Johnson was, and they returned two good wide receivers, and they've got a couple of good running backs, and they return a strong offensive line. I think Kansas State is going to have a hard time stopping Baylor's offense, and I think Baylor will struggle to stop Kansas State too, and it'll be a higher scoring game. But on the road, I'm going to go with Baylor to get this win in a very close one. And now at TCU, I think is going to be a better passing team than Kansas State will be. But TCU can't run anywhere near as well as Kansas State can. I think though Kansas State will struggle to stop TCU's passing attack. But I don't think TCU's defense is quite as good as Kansas State's is. Because this game is at Kansas State, I'm going to go with Kansas State to get this win, but I think they're going to lose one of Baylor and TCU. I chose them to lose to Baylor and beat TCU because Baylor's on the road and TCU is at home, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's the other way around. And now on the road at Kansas, because Kansas State has owned Kansas for so long, I have to go with Kansas State to get this win. I do think it'll be really close, though, and it wouldn't shock me if this is finally the year where Kansas beats Kansas State. But I'm not high on Kansas this year, and I think Kansas State is a lot better at the line of scrimmage than they are. And now at Texas Tech. So, having looked carefully at Texas Tech's roster, they're a serious contender to win the Big 12 this year. They're in good shape at quarterback and they're in better shape at wide receiver than Kansas State is. And their offensive line, I think, is going to be good enough to handle Kansas State's physical defense. And it, Kansas State's run game, I think, will probably get slowed down at some in this game, making it a good matchup for Texas Tech because Kansas State is going to be a running team. Texas Tech, with the transfers they brought in on the defensive line, I think it might be the best defensive line in the Big 12 this year. And Texas Tech returns two really good linebackers. So I'm actually going to go with Texas Tech to get this win, even though the game is at Kansas State. And now on the road at Oklahoma State, I think Kansas State will win this one fairly easily. Having looked carefully at Oklahoma State's roster, if Mike Gundy doesn't do what he's done before and turn a bad-looking roster into a good team. Oklahoma State's probably in for another rough year, and he's probably going to get fired. But of course, I don't think Oklahoma State's going to be as bad as they were last year. They wouldn't have to do much to be better than that. But I don't think Oklahoma State can slow down Kansas State's run game at all. And Kansas State is better at quarterback than they are too. And they're much better defensively. And now on the road at Utah. So Utah got a transfer quarterback who was a group of five quarterback, but he was good at that level. And having looked carefully at their roster, now Utah is a team to keep an eye on in the Big 12 this year. To me, and Utah, I think, can handle Kansas State at the line of scrimmage, and their defense, I think, is going to be about as good as Kansas State's will be, maybe even a little bit better. And I still like Whittingham a lot as a coach. And with the game being on the road, I'm actually going to go with Utah to get this win. Really, I think Kansas State will lose one of these two road games in a row of Oklahoma State and Utah. And I chose Utah for the loss because Utah, I think, is going to be a much better team than Oklahoma State, and it's also the second one of the two road games. Now, Colorado. So because Colorado can't run and they can't stop the run, I can't pick Colorado to beat Kansas State. And when Colorado loses, who should have been a first round quarterback, if he and Deion Sanders could have kept their mouths shut, and he was the only reason why Colorado played Kansas State close last year. There's no reason to think that Colorado is going to win this game. I think Kansas State wins this one fairly easily. So my prediction for Kansas State is 8-4 overall and 5-4 in the conference. But if Avery Johnson can improve as a passer, I think they'll probably win two more games than this. So that will be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.